Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors webinar series on how to lead a team in China. Do you have a high turnover of employees in China? Are you having problems in implementing your company's philosophy and culture? Have you been adapting to the Chinese culture? Woodburn Accountants and Advisors is offering this complimentary webinar series in order to be able to provide you with information and tools to enrich your China business skills and enhance your market entry efforts into the Chinese market. But before we begin today's session, allow me to go through a couple of admin points, especially for those of you that are new to the GoToWebinar system. The use of a VPN may be required by people based in mainland China, obviously due to the Great Firewall. It will help connectivity and avoid technical difficulties if you do use a VPN, so I do recommend it. I myself might have a couple of technical issues along the way. It is something that occurs whenever you do something online. Please don't exit the webinar. It usually takes about 30 seconds to 1 minute to come back, and we will then complete the webinar session. Once you launched into this session, you would have been prompted to choose your audio options. You can stick with your microphone and speakers on your laptop, tablet, or mobile. If you are having technical audio difficulties, then you may want to switch to a landline, and you click on the telephone or phone call option. This is what it looks like. You have to dial in, provide an access code and an audio PIN, and then you'll log in into the system. As we don't have a moderator for today's session, we may not be able to have the Q&A depending on time. However, please don't be shy. If you do have questions or comments, add them into the questions section of the control panel, and either I will answer you directly at the end once we've stopped recording this session, or I will answer you by email. So again, please don't be shy. Add your questions, add your comments, and I'll be happy to answer you. Today's session is being recorded. It will be uploaded to our YouTube channel within the early hours of the evening. I will be sending out an email with a PDF of the presentation together with the link to the recording if you do want to listen to it again. Now, if I could just ask for your assistance. Within your control panel, there is a hand button. If you could raise your hand, that will allow me to know that you're listening in. Thank you very much. If you could then click once again on the hand button, that will allow the hand to disappear. For those of you that are not familiar with Woodburn or our webinar series, then please allow me to introduce who we are. Woodburn Accountants and Advisors is specialized in inbound investment to China and Hong Kong. We establish, manage, and administer companies in both jurisdictions to meet our clients' specific requirements and needs. This can include everything from market entry advisory, cross-border investment advisory, tax optimization, corporate restructuring, and just basic administration functions that are required in both jurisdictions. Our clients are all international companies that are looking to invest in Asia, particularly within the two Asian regions, but we also help clients to expand within the Southeast Asian region as well. Our clients do everything from produce in China, export from China, and sell into China, as well as provide a variety of different services within the market. And they range from startup organizations all the way up to multinationals, and we also work with a couple of publicly listed firms. A minor disclaimer regarding today's presentation. As you can imagine, there's a wide range and variety of people that are listening in to today's session. The presentation is a general view for everyone today. If you would like to have a consultation, or as I mentioned, if you have questions or comments, add them into the questions section of the control panel, and I'd be more than happy to reach out and contact you for a more personal discussion. My name is Christina Kulik. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I've been in this sector since 2003 when I first arrived in Shanghai. I've got 15 years of experience in the Chinese market of helping foreign companies to invest and expand within the China region. Rather than go through my whole profile and bio, at this stage, I always like to start off the presentation with basically giving a few tidbits of what I've learned over the last 15 years of doing business here. Just to give a better background, I was born and raised in Hong Kong. I'm half French, half German. Most people consider me more Asian than actually Western or European. But I will say, when I arrived in Shanghai in 2003, I also had a culture shock, even though I came from Hong Kong. And there were a lot of things that I had to learn in order to, first of all, keep up the pace of the business, and also make myself less frustrated by not only living in Shanghai, but also working with the Chinese and working with the investors that are coming in. One of the things that I had to learn straight off the bat was patience. And this will be actually one of the 20 tips that I will be highlighting in today's presentation. But I had to deal with a lot of patience, primarily because I just did not understand how to do certain things, how to communicate properly with my staff, with suppliers, with government bureaus. And it led to a lot of moments of frustration and headbanging, which did not help me in my own successful journey, or let alone helping my clients. The second thing that I learned was having truly an eye on detail. And when I go through the 20 tips, you'll probably get an understanding of why this is one of the points I consider so important. You have to have an eye on detail, whether it's in terms of communicating with people, whether in terms of reading documentation. It is something you have to make sure that you do when you're in the Chinese market. The last but not least is the fact that no client of mine, nor have I, ever experienced the same journey. We've all had different experiences, different obstacles plop in the way. And obviously there have been outside circumstances that have caused this, whether it's been deadlines, timelines, lack of staff, too many staff. I mean, there's so many circumstances that can cause this. But everyone has had an obstacle, not just one, but several, plop along the way, causing people to either blame or just also give up. Now, the beauty of China is the fact that laws and regulations are not actually black and white. There is room for tons of interpretation, which actually means that there are ways of getting around the obstacles that plop in your path. As a result, instead of focusing on the negativity, one of the things that I try to promote with my clients is always think about the positivity. And when something pops in your route, let's think about a way of getting around it. I agree, sometimes there aren't solutions, but in the majority of cases, you'll always find a way. Obviously, it will cause more time, more frustration, more anxiety, more worry, but there are ways of getting around the obstacle in order to be able to continue with your China journey. Now, we offer monthly webinar series. August is usually the month that we take off, but we do offer a webinar series on a monthly basis, primarily to educate people on the Chinese market, and most importantly, to inspire people to remove this level of fear of doing business in China. If you have set foot in the Chinese market, besides the frustrations you've probably gone through and the language barriers, it is a fascinating country to be in. And the purpose of these webinar series is to educate you on the business culture, how to do business there, what to think about when incorporating your companies and managing your companies, managing your staff, and to eliminate this fear component. So let's go on ahead and start with today's webinar session, which is on the top 20 tips to understand China's business culture. Our agenda for today is very small, very narrow, very concise, but basically we all know that lots of organizations in China face huge capability gaps when it comes to successfully implementing international and cross-border strategies. We have to understand that the minute that you're setting foot in the Chinese market, you are making your head office now and your company an international organization, right? The strategy may be fine as a concept, but Chinese individuals and Chinese employees within companies very often lack a international mindset to allow them to implement a strategy, understand a strategy, understand the communication points, and that's obviously when things can go very wrong. Many problems related to international process and international implementation, it's always caused by a lack of cross-cultural fluency, whether it's on the part of the people in the head office or whether it's the Chinese employees or Chinese business associates that are sitting in China. And we have to face it. As I mentioned yesterday, there's no one-size-fits-all mentality that can be implemented cross-border in every single jurisdiction. Whether you're going into Russia, Brazil, China, India, you are going to face a lot of cultural barriers and communication barriers. And as a consequence, you're going to have to follow the local rules and regulations of doing business, understanding the business culture, understanding the people, and understanding how to communicate with the people. And in this webinar session, we're going to provide the top 20 tips, or at least my top 20 tips, to understand the culture and how to effectively use it when not only interviewing people, but also working with your employees, and then ultimately working with business associates. But before we begin, let's look at how you can attain a China cultural fluency. And I'm going to provide you with 5-6 suggestions about how you can do that. The first suggestion is recognize, and this may be a little bit blunt, and I apologize, but this is really the reality. You have to recognize and accept how little you know about China, and that you are not a China expert. Unless you have resided in China for a certain period of time, lived on the ground in China, there is no way that you can consider yourself a China expert. You could have paid tens of thousands of euros in market research studies and focus groups, still does not necessarily make you a China expert. The point is, when you start living in the market and you start seeing things on a personal perspective, but then from a business perspective, you learn a lot about the market. What you also have to understand is there is nobody who knows China better than the Chinese. It's a fact. They've lived there their entire lives. They've grown up with the culture. They've been educated there. They know how the other Chinese work. So when you have Chinese employees, you have to make sure that you also rely and trust on the information that they are giving you, and that they help you to be able to expand and grow in the market. One thing I can emphasize more, though, is just because I've said you're not a China expert, it doesn't mean that you should not educate yourself and continue to educate yourself on the China market, on your sector, on your industry, and how things work. Knowledge is power in China. The more you know, the more you will become an expert. But don't go into the market being quite arrogant, thinking you know everything. One of the things that I've learned when I've hired Westerners in my own organization, and they're either relatively new to the Chinese market or they've been there for a couple of years, is the fact that when they communicate with the Chinese team within my company, there is this feeling of superiority. And I don't know if it's because they feel they're Western. I mean, it's certainly not based on the knowledge level, because the Chinese team has much more knowledge in terms of how to do things in China, how to negotiate things in China, how to discuss things with government officers versus my Western team. So you've got to be very careful when you do have a Westerner in the market who's based on the ground, that, you know, they put their feet on the ground and they stay down to earth, and they don't have this arrogance, because it does put off Chinese staff members, and it also doesn't help you to grow your business, because you're not the expert, you don't know everything. You've got to have your ears open and listen to the people in terms of what they're recommending, what they're suggesting, and how to move your business forward. The second suggestion that I have is you also need to accept that you take a significant level of cultural bias into every cross-border transaction. Your background makes you see things in one specific way, but your Chinese counterparty probably looks at the same situation and sees something absolutely different. You are always going to look things at the point of, I want it to be an advantage for me, right? And I'll give you an example of this. We have a lot of clients that do cross-border transactions whereby they don't have entities in China, but they are signing agreements from, let's say, the UK, from Germany, from the US, with Chinese clients. And at the point where you're negotiating your contract, if you don't know how things work in China, you won't be able to make that contract into your benefit. Why? Because you're negotiating that contract from the thought process of, this is how it's going to benefit me in my home jurisdiction. The issue is that when you're transferring funds from China overseas, there are quite a few tax liabilities. And the Chinese are smart about this. What do? They prefer not having a clause at all in the contract about the tax. And when it comes to the first transfer, they will tell you all the tax liabilities have to be paid by you, right? It's a cultural bias. They're using that to their advantage. So when you do have contract negotiations like this, make sure you work with a Chinese lawyer who can help you make sure your contracts are bulletproof and have every single clause within it that you haven't even thought about. Because it's pertaining to China. It's not pertaining to your home jurisdiction. And always think, you're going to try and do things to your advantage, which is great. It's perfect. But you should also learn what is the advantage for the Chinese side. That's your leverage. That's your power. It's knowing both sides of the coin and how you can use that then to your advantage. The third suggestion is critical. Build into your thinking that just because things are different in China, it does not necessarily mean that they are right. They might be right, but a different approach might be better than the way you do it back home, or it could just be absolutely wrong, meaning that the Chinese are taking advantage of you. And obviously, this sounds a little bit complicated, but there's a saying in China that's pretty much used on a daily basis, which is, well, you know, that's China. That's how it works. That's absolute rubbish, and I hate this excuse. If you're being told something, and you're being told that this is the right thing to do, but your gut is telling you something completely different, either because you wouldn't do something like that back home, or because logically it doesn't make sense, or because all the previous communication said something different, then get an opinion before you just sign off on it. Okay? Trust your gut and don't feel ashamed to ask for opinions. There are your employees on the ground. There are your service providers on the ground, whether it's a lawyer, an accountant, an advisor, a consultant, an HR expert. Get someone's opinion before you just sign off on something. And I completely agree that this takes time. It's not an efficient process. Waiting to get an opinion from someone, especially if it's a contradiction to what you've been told, requires more time spent on that issue. But at least it might save you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars at a later stage if what you're signing off on is wrong. If you have a staff member that's also telling you something, and again, your gut is saying, I don't know, this just sounds too funny, ask someone an opinion. That's what all these consultants are there for. You shouldn't feel ashamed or feel shy. My rule of thumb in China is honestly, there is no dumb question. Ask whatever is on your mind, all right? And please, just because things are different in China and the culture is different, it does not necessarily mean that that is the right thing you should be doing for your growth or your business in China. So ask for opinions and ask for suggestions. The fourth suggestion is think about the impact of every decision for every location. And this happens quite often. Sometimes a centrally determined policy is created and is supposed to be implemented in all the jurisdictions where there is a subsidiary. But in many cases, things are not adaptable for China. And so many problems can happen. For example, let's say you decide, or the headquarter decides, that they want to move towards a flatter structure. This is great. But in China, the concept of a hierarchy within a company, within an organization, is critical. If you want to hire someone, they will only accept the role if you show that there is a way to move up the ladder. And if you have a flat structure, they have no way of moving up the ladder. They don't know what their future is within your organization. I have a perfect example which happened recently with a client where they wanted to unify an IT system. They purchased this beautiful, expensive system that they were going to implement in every single jurisdiction so that basically the HQ could have some control. Now, what's the problem in China? The problem in China is that even with the VPN, they were unable to access the software system. In addition to that, this fancy, expensive software system prevented them from logging onto the online banking system in China, as well as the online tax system, which meant that no payments could be made online and no tax filings could be made online. As a consequence, what did the local GM decide? He decided, fine, we're going to have a set of computers with this fancy IT system. We'll go on it for what is needed and what is possible, but we will still have to keep our old IT system in order to be able to operate and function our company. Do you think the GM and the staff of the office are happy? Not at all. They have to use two systems. They're spending more time on using these two various systems, and it's causing so much confusion within their organization that they're even having issues with retaining staff because some are just not happy with the outcome of what's happening. So make sure that if you create a centrally determined policy, discuss it with your China team. Make sure it is adaptable before you start saying it's a requirement and a must. Suggestion number 5, accept that a good idea is a good idea regardless of where it started. Now, again, I'm going to highlight this point because I think it's critical. The experts are the Chinese. They are the ones who know how to do the business, how to do the negotiation. And not everyone is a bad egg, all right? You're going to find good quality employees who are going to have the same vision as you in terms of wanting to grow the company and grow the business within the Chinese market. So at some point, you do have to show trust. And you got to listen. You've got to promote the fact that they generate ideas and suggestions. That's the whole point, is that you have this team of local staff who are the experts who generate these ideas for you in terms of how to increase your business in the market. Now, a lot of my job is being the middleman, where I have the Chinese team coming to me and saying, HQ won't listen, could you help us push this idea forward? I have certain limitations myself, so I can't always help in that regard. When it's pertaining to accounting or finance issues or banking issues or invoicing processes and things that are pertaining to corporate services, I am more than happy, especially if I like the idea and the suggestion, to try and persuade the HQ to implement. The hardest part is trying to convince the HQ about how things should be done in the Chinese market. And the fact that they are not physically located in China, there is so much requirement into persuasion and highlighting the benefits and the pros and advantages and whatnot. It gets very difficult. Having said that, it is also a two-way street where you will find also a lot of Chinese staff that are reluctant to implement ideas from the head office only because it causes a little bit or a lack of efficiency within the team. It doesn't mean it's a bad idea. So there is this cross-cultural training in that regard in terms of respecting one another's ideas, sitting down, talking about them, and being open to these ideas in order to increase and grow the business in China. It's one of the things that I find is truly important. As you can imagine, I'm going to repeat it again today at this point, and I'll repeat it at the end as well. Knowledge is the key for anyone. If you are a Westerner and you are sitting in your head office and you have no intention of relocating to China, but you are in charge of managing the China operation, knowledge is key. People in your organization, they need to be more aware of the impact that the international culture has on every facet of the business. They need to be given specific knowledge necessary to work their way around the global environment, the international environment. And they need to apply that knowledge and awareness to the benefit of the business. Remember, everyone has the same goal, regardless of where you're sitting. Everyone has the same goal. They want to increase the China business. They want to increase and make that journey successful. So one thing is certain, cultural fluency within an organization, it doesn't happen by accident. It requires planning, it requires training, it requires targeted interventions, it requires relationship building. And most of the top 20 tips that I'm going to be providing to you is about this relationship building so that people understand the different cultural aspects in order to have a cultural fluency that then moves the business forward. So let's look at the top 20 tips to understand China's business culture. Now, I've generalized these 20 points. With some of them, they pertain more to employees and employee relationships. Some can be used for both employee relationships and business associates, whether that's suppliers, customers, third-party agents, whomever. But yeah, I mean, think of it from both perspectives. So the first point is guanxi. And if you guys have never been in China, guanxi is a concept about personal relationship, all right? And it basically states, don't underestimate the importance of relationship building, whether that's with employees or whether that's with business associates. The guanxi is something that is generally, you've got to see it as the umbrella which holds everything in terms of your business culture. Now, if you are a startup organization in China and you have just a couple, maybe just even one employee in China, think about the personal relationship development with that staff. Don't isolate them. That's the worst thing you could do, is isolate them. You want to be able to have people fly over, meet with the guy or girl, and be able to travel around with them in China. And when you do these travels, build a personal relationship. Ask personal questions. The Chinese love it. At least all my staff have loved it when I've asked them about their families, their spouses, their children, how's life in general, where did they go on holiday, where would they love to go on holiday, all of these types of things. It's about building a personal relationship with your staff. Once you build this personal relationship, they are more hesitant, if not embarrassed, to leave that relationship. And the same goes with business associates. If you're working with suppliers, if you're working with customers, they want to build these personal relationships. How are you going to do that? You're going to be able to do that outside of a boardroom. So you'll have to do it at dinners, at lunches, walking in the corridors of the office, karaokeing, where you can make a fool of yourselves on both sides. Things like that will help to build the personal relationship. And once you've built the personal relationship, this opens tremendous doors for you in terms of your progress within the Chinese market. And I know that in the Western world, personal relationships are not really happening because people are kind of stuck on their phones, on the internet, they're on social media. They're not really interacting as they did in the olden days. But that's one of the key components in China, is this face-to-face relationship building that is vital. In terms of the employees, one thing I want to mention is not only should people be traveling over to China to spend time with the staff, you should bring the staff over to you. Help him to see the headquarters, meet people, build that network so that if there are ideas or issues that he wants to raise to improve the China business, he knows, first of all, who to reach out to, but also he's met them. So there's more of a comfort feeling when he has to discuss these points with those people. The second point is people are comfortable building relationships with honorable people who show respect to those to whom respect is due. My rule of thumb is everyone deserves to be respected, all the way from the taxi drivers to the servers in the restaurants, to hotel people, to your employees, and to every single person within your office, all the way from the cleaning lady up to the managers, as well as everyone within suppliers. The issue, of course, is you do need to show respect to people that are higher up in the ladder, and that refers to point 3. In China, not all relationships are equal. You do need to show respect to people based on age. So the older they are, the more seniority that they have, and obviously their educational background. If they have been educated overseas, this is quite a high level of respect. If you also have a Chinese who speaks multiple languages, you show also more respect to that individual. So my 2 rules of thumb there are really respect everyone. I know a lot of Westerners come into China, and because of the frustration of the culture, they do sometimes feel more superior compared to the Chinese. Try and take that arrogance out of the map. You've got to be on the same level playing field in terms of respect and trust and loyalty. Just one thing I want to mention is, trust and loyalty is gained over time. So just one personal meeting is not going to gain you trust and loyalty. It does take time. You've got to know who you're dealing with, who you're talking to in a meeting. If you are arranging meetings outside of the office and your staff are doing that for you, try to get some background details about the people you're going to meet. Who is important? Who is less important? Who should you meet first? Who should you talk to first? Who should you give your name card to first? These are just some preparatory things you can do before going into very large and very serious meetings. The next thing is managers, as well as a lot of, I don't want to just say managers, but it tends to be more people who have higher seniority. But you'll also sometimes find this with people who are down the ladder in the hierarchy. The Chinese are direct. They're direct people. They won't always, they're not going to go around the loophole. If you ask them, they will say what's on their mind and tell you upfront and straight. So be prepared for that. Be aware of it. Don't take offense to it if someone is direct and you perceive that as being rude. It's their way of doing things. Don't perceive it as being rude. Just, understand that maybe the way they're talking, the fact that English is their second language, it always can seem a little bit over-exaggerated when they are a bit direct with you. But, don't take it so personally. The next point is, in return for loyalty, the boss is expected to show consideration and interest in all aspects of a subordinate's life. And again, this is all about developing a relationship with your local team, with your suppliers, with your customers, with any of the third-party agents. It's the guanxi. And as I mentioned, developing or showing consideration and interest in someone's life really brings a step forward. Now, here's a couple of tips of what you can do, particularly with employees, to help with that. When you visit your office, don't just have team meetings. Every visit, take people from different parts of the hierarchy and ask for a one-to-one lunch. In that one-to-one lunch, you can probably find out a lot of information about what goes on in the company. You might even get a whistleblower. all right? Who tells you something funny is happening within the company. By having these one-on-one lunches, you gain so much valuable information as to whether your team is happy, as to whether there's a bad egg within your organization. But you can't just do it with the GM. You gotta meet people from, again, the different parts of the hierarchy. You start off the lunch about the personal aspects, and you go on then talking about business, right? Also talking a little bit, are they happy within your organization? If they're not happy, listen carefully to what they have to say as to why they're not happy. And maybe you can fix things. So every visit, try and meet different people for this type of one-to-one lunch or one-to-one dinner or having a drink after work to gain insider information into what's happening. But if you don't develop this personal relationship with these staff, they're not going to tell you anything. So, slowly build up these relationships. You've got to understand, and again, I say this because the Chinese are the experts in the Chinese market, that a lot of the senior managers, particularly if they have to deal with the government officers, will have close relationships with the government officers. This is not necessarily a negative thing. If you feel like you should be involved in these relationship building process, then whenever you visit, make sure you take out the local party officers or officials for dinner, for karaoke, so that you have a part of that relationship. Of course, the biggest worry for anyone is if the senior managers have these close relationships with the government officers, what happens if you need to fire or if these senior managers resign? Then you're kind of at a loss, right? And you have to restart these relationships. So make sure that in some shape or form, you're involved in these relationship buildings with these with these government officers as well. Point 7 is critical, absolutely critical. I hope you have all learned the expression to lose face in China. That is the one thing that you don't want Chinese people to feel or experience. Losing face basically means you have completely and utterly insulted them in front of a group of people, and you've made it public, okay? You have to always show respect within seniority. Obviously, you're going to disagree with people, but there is a way of disagreeing with someone that doesn't have to be insulting, that does not have to be demeaning. And unfortunately, a lot of Westerners do it in that way. The minute that somebody loses face, you have no idea what type of revenge they're going to take on you. And I don't use the word revenge lightly. We had a situation with a client in Shenzhen once, whereby, unfortunately, the Dutch GM, he lost his temper and he threatened one of his employees that he would fire him, and he did it in the open office space because a mistake was made. Unfortunately, he lost his temper and he did it in public. What did this staff do? Because he felt like he was going to lose his job and he felt, well, I'm anyway going to lose my job. He went to the Administration of Industry and Commerce and denounced the company for, I don't even remember what excuse. The excuse was, or the reason was not valid, actually. But any time that a government bureau receives such a notification, they have to investigate. So what did that mean? It meant that within 5 working days, there was a government officer knocking on the front door of the office, asking to do a full inspection of the office. You don't want people to lose face, all right? You just, the fear I would have would be, oh my God, what are they gonna do against me or against my company? We also had another client who terminated an employee, not in public, they did it privately, but the termination was so unexpected by the staff because they had never received warning letters of bad behavior. They had never actually received any information about poor performance, that once suddenly there was this termination put in front of them, they were shocked. They weren't expecting, and they did lose face, right? Because it's suddenly you're terminating me and you're telling me all the bad things I've done, but why haven't you warned me along the way? What did this staff do? This was a service company. This staff then went on over the weekend to call all the clients that she was handling to say that she was going to open up her own business and whether the clients wanted to move along with her. She was anyway terminated. And unfortunately, in the employment contract, they didn't have a non-compete clause. So she did that. So you've got to be aware of the cultural aspect of disgracing someone. You have to make sure that you do things in a logical and respectful way. And a lot of this is also things that you would probably do in your home jurisdiction. Respect the people, terminate them in the right way. And remember, employment laws and regulations in China are strict. So if you don't do things in the right way, it could also impact you later on, not just with the losing face thing and the revenge aspect, but also from a legal perspective. Point 8, do as many favors for people as possible. Sounds strange, but it's the reality. If you have the ability, help people. Now here's just one very simple example. You have a female employee who comes to you and says, Christina, I have my child's winter concert or piano recital or doctor's appointment, and I need to take at least 2 to 3 hours off of work in order to be able to be with my child. Do it. Regardless of timelines and deadlines of projects, do it. Provide this favor. Don't report it to HR. Let this person go for 2 to 3 hours in order to be with their child. You will find that this person will probably come on the Saturday and work half day, if not the full day, to catch up on their work. If you treat people and provide them with favors, they always need to repay it back, or they will always feel like they have to repay it back. So try and help people if they ask for it, right? If they don't ask for it, then sometimes you can also make the suggestions. If you're hearing about a certain exchange, say, I will help you do this. The things I've done for certain clients whereby I've received phone calls, clients completely in shock about what to do next, where I've said, okay, you know what? I'm going to call your lawyer. I will do that for you. I will update you what happens. Or I will call I've had to do this twice. I will call the police for you. I'll make sure they'll come to your office. You do these types of favors and people will always feel like they owe you something. And this is something that's very important in the Chinese market because as I had mentioned regarding my bio, one of the things that I've learned is obstacles always come in your way. And if you have people that owe you or need to repay you, you can always use them to help you get around these obstacles. Point 9 is talking about business cards and personal WeChat accounts. A couple of years ago, I would never have talked about personal WeChat accounts. But for me, nowadays, 2 things are critical. Make sure you have business cards readily available and make sure you have your own personal WeChat account. Why? Because whenever you meet someone, whether it's for a meeting or a networking event, you will always want to exchange your business card. And now most people are asking versus a business card, can I add you on WeChat? You may never do business with them, but they love the fact that they can add you on WeChat. So make sure you have a personal WeChat account. For where personal WeChat accounts can be set up by anybody, anywhere around the world. You will need someone to help you verify the account, but it can be set up from anywhere. Make sure you have a personal WeChat account. People will love the fact that they can add you. And they will have so much respect for you that they can add you on WeChat. Now, business cards is something that is very, very important in the Chinese business culture. And this is important for when you are interviewing candidates. And it's very important when you are meeting business associates. Again, whether it's suppliers, customers, third-party agents, whomever. Business cards are always exchanged upon meeting. It's always better to stand up when exchanging the business cards. Before presenting your business card, make sure the card is clean. If you have dirt specks on it, or it's been in your bag so long, or the ink has spread, don't give that. It needs to be a clean card. Make sure that you hold it Chinese side up, which basically means that you should have a bilingual business card in China, one side in Chinese, the other side in English. And you should hold it facing up on the Chinese side, and you give it with two hands. Now, historically, I just wanted to add this in as a funny story because probably people aren't aware that the two-hand thing is really critical. But really, historically, I'm talking about 16th, 17th, 18th centuries BC when business cards started to appear. If you gave it with two hands, if you gave your business card with two hands to somebody, there was no way of you being able to attack them. There was always a fear that if you gave it with one hand, you could use your other hand to take a knife, take a gun, and shoot them. That there would be a sign of aggression. By giving it with two hands, your focus is 100% on introducing yourself to that person. And again, it's a level of respect. Now, the important aspect is that the Chinese, whether it's your personal WeChat account or whether it is your business card, this is your personal profile. So not that you need to have your whole life written on your business card, but they will study and look at your business card. They will look at your name. They will look at the company name. They will look at your address to see where you're located. They will see whether there's a telephone number, whether there is a WeChat ID, whether there is a Skype number, whether there is an email address, whether there is a website. Now, again, I'm not saying that all of this information has to be on there, but the Chinese do study the business card to understand who you are. It is the first impression that you are making. And the same goes with your personal WeChat account. You should have a profile on your personal WeChat account, which they then will also look at. The only thing I will recommend regarding personal WeChat accounts is that when you add someone, you will only see the name of the individual. So you may want to immediately edit it to add then the company name, especially if they have not given you business cards. The new millennials don't want to give you business cards anymore. They prefer to just add you on the WeChat accounts. So the business cards are truly something that is important, as well as setting up the WeChat accounts. Now, point 10, I'm sure if a lot of you have done business in China will realize this. I learned this at the age of 18. Meetings are often long and seemingly without clear objectives. I remember one of the first business trips that my father took me on. I was 18 years old, and he wanted me to experience a trip with him to see whether I liked the business and liked the industry. And so I went with him to Changchun. And we went actually with a client, and we literally sat in a meeting room for, I believe it was 8 to 9 hours, where I was quiet the whole time. I was sort of in the background, really just paying attention and listening, quite frankly, trying not to fall asleep. Because when I left that meeting, I actually said to my father, I don't understand why we flew here. You actually did not discuss any points related to the agenda. Nothing was discussed. And if it was discussed, it was touched on very briefly, and the Chinese counterparty basically said, we will come back to you on that point. Now, why, and again, this was my first meeting. So this was something then that my father taught me, which was the fact that any face-to-face meeting, it's all about relationship building and respect building, rather than focusing on an agenda and focusing on the business tasks and moving forward with the order of placements or whatever it had to be. My father never lost his patience. He was so calm throughout those 8 hours. The clients, however, did lose their patience, certainly raised their voices, and to watch my father then try to calm them down was fascinating. But it is very common that you will have meetings in China where you will leave and you will think, what a waste of time. I've spent all this money for a flight ticket. But you've got to understand, from the Chinese perspective, they felt it was an honor to have you in their office. They wanted to focus on the relationship building. And most likely, which was the case for this first meeting that I had ever been to, they took us out for a dinner. Again, it was a 2 to 3 hour dinner. There was a lot of liquor and wine involved. It was a tremendous feast on the table with a lot of different Chinese dishes. And then it was followed up with karaoke. But you have to realize that all of these first initial face-to-face meetings, it's all about respect building and relationship building and having a face-to-face relationship with people. Even though that there is now this development of WeChat, and a lot of people love to communicate over WeChat, there is nothing that beats a face-to-face meeting to sort out and solve things as your relationship develops. So certainly, please keep that in mind. As to point 10, again, this is exactly what I hit on during my bio. Patience is essential if you wish to capitalize on any situation, all right? Whether that's dealing with your bank, whether that's dealing with your tax officer, whether that is dealing with your staff and the communication problems you might have. But keep in mind, these meetings, these face-to-face meetings, nothing ever beats that. Generally, the Chinese are very interested in having long-term commitments. And I want to say that nowadays, even with employees and staff, they don't want to switch jobs every so often. If they're smart and educated individuals, they actually want to work for a company through a long period of time. And they also want to have a long-term commitment, which is why the hierarchy aspect is so important. So definitely when you are going into the Chinese market, everybody has their short-term goals and objectives. And by short-term, generally that means 2 to 3 years, where they've created objectives and goals and they're focusing on that. But don't forget to analyze and build the long-term goals and objectives and understand how you can develop long-term commitment with any Chinese individual, whether it's staff or business associates or third-party agents in China. Now, this is going to be a bit of a contradiction. As I said earlier, the Chinese tend to be very direct people. Yeah, the issue is you should not be direct, though. You need to be diplomatic. You need to remember that developing the relationship takes time. So keep in mind that you shouldn't be too direct with things that are occurring in China. Point 14 is looking at the comprehension level. Now, the first aspect that I want to highlight here is English is not the first language of the Chinese. Chinese is the first language of the Chinese. So in terms of understanding with communication, comprehension is something that is critical. Now, if English is not your first language, but rather it's German, French, Spanish, Italian, whatever it might be, and you're now speaking English, don't forget that English is also your second language. So there will be a lot of communication problems along the way. Make sure that when you are talking to employees, you talk slowly. When you're talking to business associates, talk slowly. The best thing is to take one concept and say it in 2 to 3 different ways to make sure that the people have understood you. Always repeat yourself to know that there is full comprehension of whatever you're discussing. This also then leads me to the 15th point, which is it is difficult for the Chinese to say no directly. So yes, they can be very direct in terms of statements and whatnot, but if there is a negative point that needs to be raised, they sometimes are very shy or ashamed to actually voice it. I have a lot of issues with points 13, 14, 15 myself because I tend to be someone who wants to be efficient. When I first started out in China, this is how it worked in my industry and my sector. I would tell my staff, who has the network, the connections, and the knowledge, to contact a tax bureau regarding a ruling that we wanted to clarify or get more information on. And I had a specific question for my staff to ask. So, you know, she called and immediately thereafter got the answer and hung up. And then she told me the answer. And I said, well, did you ask them this and this and this based on their response? And she said, no, you didn't ask me to. So one level is the education of your Chinese team, of the people you're going to be working with in China, in the fact that a lot of them are not educated to think outside of the box and to think different angles that can help you aid in a comprehension. Most of the overseas Chinese have learned this because they've actually been educated abroad. It is something that is very frustrating and very difficult to teach and to train to someone. When you ask someone to check up on something, you also have to be very clear in the information that you want to receive back, and always think of alternate circumstances. Give them all possible areas where they might have to take that conversation. It's the same in meetings. When you have a translator in the room or you have a Chinese staff member, make sure you give an outline of where you want the conversation to go and think about all the possible scenarios. It will help you to be extremely efficient. In terms of the Chinese saying no, my only advice again is build the personal relationships so that they don't feel shy or ashamed to say no to you. It's not a bad thing if they say no to you because there's a valid reason behind it. So make sure you build that personal relationship that they can feel that they can talk to you about anything and also answer no to you. In China, it's very hard to read body language, especially by Western standards. So if you have lived abroad your whole life and you're coming out to China, it's very hard to read people's body language and interpret it. So don't rely always on the body language to get kind of a feedback or an answer. It has to be part of your verbal communication. Gift giving is an everyday part of Chinese business culture. Just to give you an example, every time that I trip, I always buy sweets, cookies, or chocolates to bring back to my team. They love it. They love the fact that I have thought about them when I've gone away on a business trip. The gifts should not be expensive because, one, you don't want to make it seem like it's a bribe. People don't want to be bribed. But to give a gift that is considerate, is small, is something that you should definitely think about when visiting business associates in China, whether it's clients, customers, employees, and again, not things that are big, but it's things that you should just think about when you're coming in. Gifts should always be wrapped, unless you're giving it as a group gift, for example, to your team. I don't wrap the chocolates that I buy. But if you are dealing, for example, with a supplier or a customer, wrap it so that they're not embarrassed that they have to open it in front of you. Usually they will never open it in front of you. They'll do that at a later stage. The next thing is, maybe you haven't realized this, but it's something that I certainly have realized, whereby, especially the older generation, the Chinese are very patriotic. So make sure you also respect the political situation in China, whether it's associated to human rights, whether it's associated to the trade war. Make sure you don't make disparaging comments. All right, this will really put people off. Keep your opinion about these things to yourself. These are sensitive topics that you don't want to raise around a dinner table or raise in a board meeting. You want to make sure that these things are just kept within yourself, okay? You may not agree with what happens in China. By all means, people are free to disagree, but don't bring it up either with your staff or don't bring it up also in a business situation. Entertaining is an extremely important part of the relationship building process. So, for example, maintaining staff wishes, one of the things that we do on a monthly basis is we do a combined birthday lunch. So anybody who's had a birthday in July, we organize a lunch at the end of the month and we celebrate their birthdays. We also try to do, on occasion, sports activities. Like, for example, if we've had it once before where a group of my staff, they wanted one lunch a week to spend a little bit more time at lunch to go and play badminton. They did. It also meant that without me having to ask, they stayed longer in the office. Entertaining your team, doing team building exercises, providing trainings, which is also a form of entertainment, taking them out for lunches or dinners is something that they love and truly, truly respect. They adore it. In terms of dealing with business associates, taking people out for lunch, taking people out for dinner is also a big component about the personal relationship building. Do it. It is critical. It is something that should be done. And you might even enjoy yourself when you do it. Just keep in mind that when you suggest having a dinner, because you are making the invitation, it also means you are the one that has to pay. There is no split bill concept in China. So whoever does the invitation is the one that will pay. If you have a supplier that's inviting you out, or you have a customer who says, this time around, I will invite you, let them pay. Don't make the offer of doing which is splitting the bill. So be aware of that aspect. So just to conclude, because we've hit the 1 hour mark, at the end of the day, Chinese business people, especially those in the younger generation, are understanding and are respectful of cultural differences. Also because they're becoming more intrigued, interested, and they're also traveling more abroad where they have the ability to understand these cultural differences. They don't expect foreigners to be fully accustomed to their traditions. However, having a basic grasp of the business etiquette, the culture, it can only impress the colleagues, the employees, the clients, the suppliers, their third-party agents, which only naturally then builds up stronger working relationships and clearer and smoother communications. So just a couple of tips that I want to offer as a conclusion today is definitely educate yourself on the culture. There are training courses that can be had overseas. I know quite a few providers in the UK. I know a couple in Germany as well, and in the US, where they offer trainings on business etiquette and cultural differences. Learn very basic Chinese. Actually, even at a minimum, you should learn ni hao, which means hello. If you do that, oh, the giggles you will get from your counterparties will be amazing. Just by simply learning these two words, ni and hao. Learning very basic Chinese not only will probably help you feel more comfortable in the Chinese market, but it will raise giggles, smiles, and happiness from your counterparties. Learn a little bit about the geography of China. I'm not saying learn about the whole geography of China, but wherever you are actually traveling to, or wherever you are planning on setting up your business or have already set up your business, learn a little bit about that region. Why? Because you have several religions in China. You have definite cultural discrepancies between regions, that wherever, and most importantly, you have different food delicacies depending on the region. So just learning a little bit about the geography of where you're initially going to be doing business in China will help you a lot, and also understanding the more local cultures. Try everything. Don't have a fear, and I say this particularly pertaining to food and karaoke. Don't have a fear to do this, because it will only increase the respect that people have for you if you do try everything. The goal for everyone should be to build strong and long-term relationships with staff and with business associates. And this comes from building both personal as well as corporate relationships. And in order to be able to do that, you need to have a lot of patience and do a lot of things on from a face-to-face perspective, but also don't forget to download personal WeChat because that will definitely be needed as it's another form of communication. I hope you all enjoyed today's session. We've run out of time, so whether there are a couple of questions that came in and I will answer you directly. If you are interested in a free consultation or you want just simple, a second opinion or some advice, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at christina@woodburnglobal.com or info@woodburnglobal.com. We have a bunch of different online resources that we publish. We have an e-newsletter that goes out on a weekly basis, and we also have a variety of different social media platforms where we are active on. You can follow me or you can follow our company pages, but please feel free to subscribe. We have 3 additional webinar sessions being hosted this week. Tomorrow will be a very short session because I just want to emphasize how critical it is to do trainings for individuals and that it doesn't have to be something that's so expensive. In addition, we'll look at how you can employ talent in China. What options do you have in terms of that regard? And then we're going to have a very unique discussion on Friday. It won't actually be a presentation. It'll be more of a discussion point between Manfred Steinkellner from Steinkellner China Search, which is a recruitment agency, on how to find the right people for a successful organization in China. So please, if you haven't subscribed or registered for those webinars and you're interested, please do so. And I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope you found today's presentation useful and interesting. Look forward to seeing you all again very soon, and I wish you a pleasant evening. Thank you and goodbye.